Should you have any reason that you don't want this aired publicly, don't hesitate to reach out. We are a confidential organization. It's what we do very well. And so we are definitely on board with doing what we can to make sure all information is safe and secure. That being said, this is an educational webinar. We want to get this to as many people as possible. So we're going to keep tossing it out there so long as there's no objections. We're relaunching our Friday webinars. We're super excited to have Annie Landis, the other person that you see on your screen there. She's our new prevention coordinator. She's been a part of the team for a little bit now, and I cannot express how happy we are to have her as part of our organization. So she is going to be leading this webinar. And Annie, I think I'll turn it over to you now.
All right, thank you. Hi, I'm Annie. I just started working at DVS about a month ago, and a large part of my role as a prevention educator will be to work with teenagers to develop the skills they need to have healthy relationships and to recognize the warning signs of toxic and abusive relationships. So today we're going to be talking about some common myths that teenagers may believe are part of or even fundamental to a healthy relationship. So dating as a teenager, oh right, some agreements ahead of time. So today we want to do self-focus and really work on like how we can apply this to our work personally, as well as intent versus impact. Chris, did you want to go over the agreements?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to. I'm also hearing myself a little bit there. Maybe I'm gonna speaker on your end. So I'm just gonna mute you for a second because otherwise I'm just gonna focus on my own voice and it's gonna be awkward for everybody. So intent versus impact. Let's remember that all the things we say do have an impact regardless of the intent. And on the flip side, let's make sure we're understanding the intent behind what's said. And letting us know what the impact is. And this is a brave space. This is a place to put forward your own thoughts. I think a lot of people here were here before when Gina was giving these, so we're going to move through these fast. Move up. If you're somebody who kind of shrinks a little bit, who likes to listen, has thoughts, but doesn't necessarily share them, feel free. This is a great place to share. And if you're somebody who feels like sharing every single thought that comes into their head, and I know what that's like, this is a good place to practice moving back. We've already discussed confidentiality. If you want something confidential, do not hesitate to reach out. We do it. We understand it. We appreciate it. And if you're okay with the way things get posted and talked about, awesome. You have the right to pass. You don't have to answer any question that's asked. We do ask you to engage as much as you can. Makes it fun for us, makes it fun for you, I believe. And take care of yourself. If we do touch base on something that's reminds you of a hard time, makes you feel like you're back in a hard time, or if we're just talking about stuff that's tough, take a step, go get a drink of water, come back, and let us know how we can help. Does that work, Annie? I'm gonna.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Chris. All right, so dating as a teenager is really tough because this is the time when teenagers are beginning to transition from adolescence to adulthood, and they start having a lot more freedom and higher expectations. They're taking on more responsibility and also dealing with crazy hormones, wild emotions, and academic pressure. And it's during this time that they're going to be entering their first romantic relationships. And as they start dating, they're going to be learning what to expect from the media they consume, their friends, and their home environments. And for a lot of teens, these are not good models for what a healthy relationship looks like. So it's easy for them to kind of have some misconceptions about what that might look like going into it. So the first myth that we're going to cover today is that couples should never argue or disagree. That conflict in a relationship is always a bad thing. It shows a couple is incompatible or that there are serious problems in the relationship. This is wrong. Conflict is an important part of a healthy relationship. It allows for partners to express and advocate for their needs, desires, and priorities. While too much conflict can certainly be a bad thing, some disagreements are necessary for a relationship to be happy and sustainable. So what does unhealthy conflict look like? And feel free to add in the chat anything that you would like to add. Like if you can find an example of unhealthy conflict that's not on this slide. I'd love to see that in the chat. But yeah, so unhealthy conflict could look like, or why is avoiding conflict unhealthy? It can lead to passive aggressiveness, and trying to get out the problems you're having and the feelings you're having without really confronting them in ways that can be very confusing or upsetting for the other person to try to understand. It can also lead to assumptions about the relationship, where if you are not expressing how you're feeling and they're not expressing how you're feeling, then there might be an assumption that everything's okay and that there are no problems, and that your partner loves Chinese food because they never say, no, let's not go to the Chinese food restaurant tonight. And it can also lead to a power dynamic imbalance, where if one person is really assertive and the other person tends to be more on the passive side, then it might be that the person who's very assertive is always making the decisions and is always expressing their needs, and it just doesn't get resolved on both ends. So what does unhealthy conflict look like? That can look like name calling, or you say mean things to one another, and mean-spirited comments. It can look like trying to win, where instead of facing the conflict as a problem to solve together, it's one person trying to prove that they're right and prove that what they're saying is the correct way to look at a problem. It could also be blaming the other person rather than taking accountability and saying that everything that's going wrong is the other person's fault. And it could also look like using threats or violence, which would be a really bad way to solve conflict and is abusive. And so what does healthy conflict look like? If that's what unhealthy conflict looks like, that looks like assertive communication, letting them know, like, this is how I feel and this is what I need. And it's taking accountability, saying, this is, I acknowledge that I made a mistake and something I've done has caused harm to you, and I'm going to work on fixing that. It could also come respecting the other person. It's also very important to respect the other person's beliefs, opinions, and goals. And also advocating for your own and not compromising those, because everybody's beliefs and opinions and goals should be a part of the conversation, and one does not take priority over the others. And then there's willingness to compromise from both parties, knowing that you're going to have to make sacrifices, and knowing that they're going to have to make sacrifices for you, and it's finding that balance. So why might a teen struggle with healthy conflict? So there could be that they're afraid of upsetting their partner, and afraid if they bring up problems in the relationship that their partner might need that or leave them. And there can also be gender roles and expectations in this, where, the boys can be pressured by society to express their feelings with aggressiveness, and to convey like how they're feeling angrily and with force, whereas girls might be socialized to prioritize keeping peace and prioritize the other person's happiness and needs over their own, and over getting what they need from the relationship. It could also be that their family doesn't model healthy conflict. So if their parents fight a lot or don't talk any of their problems through and just ignore them all, then they don't really have a very healthy way of learning how to engage in this. And of course, that they could just lack positive communication skills, because as teenagers are entering their first relationship, they're pretty new to it, and they haven't had a chance to have trial and error and see what works and what doesn't work. Yeah, so the
Yeah.
second.
So Annie, just while we're on this, one thing I was thinking about, and this isn't necessarily just for you, but I was thinking about this point, and I was thinking about how, you know, communication and conflict works in relationships. And you had mentioned at first that there's, of course, the media presents conflict in a very certain way. I think that's very present, right? Like, I think about any show that I've ever seen that, a relationship is the core portion, the plot device of the show. And it's always the very first argument where the cracks start to form, where they disagree, and you can tell, like, well, they've only got a couple episodes left at most, depends on what TV show you're watching, of course. But that's almost universal. There's no healthy conflict communication that's presented in a lot of shows until potentially you get into stuff that might be outside of the age range that you feel comfortable having a younger child watch. So I think it's really important that we bring up, like, yeah, this seems simple, but it's really not, right? Like, they might not ever get shown this. Some families, they have disagreements, and the parents will bring it to the bedroom to show a unified front, and that makes sense from a parenting perspective, but it also shows a lack, or it never demonstrates proper conflict resolution in front of a child who's going into their own romantic relationship. So yeah, just wanted to toss that out there. And if anyone else has thoughts on this, we'd love to hear them. So don't ever hesitate to share. So what's the second myth?
So the second myth is that couples should not keep anything from each other. That a healthy couple should tell each other everything, and keeping things private means a partner is hiding something or doesn't trust the other person. This is wrong. Everyone has the right to privacy, and being in a relationship with someone does not entitle them to know everything about their partner. Honesty is a very important part of relationship, but honesty does not mean that someone cannot keep their personal information private. So why can oversharing be unhealthy? It could cross boundaries where someone might not be ready to hear every detail about your personal life and every bad thing that's ever happened to you, and your relationship with your parents in the first date or the second date, and it might make them uncomfortable. And a lot of times these are things that need to be eased into, and it's also really important to remember that after the relationship ends, the other person is not going to forget what you told them. And this is especially important for teenagers, because those high school relationships can last sometimes 2 weeks, sometimes 2 months. I'm sure sometimes 2 years too, but some teenagers might have like a lot of different relationships, and telling everyone you meet all of your personal information, sharing all of your phone passwords and all your personal information and all your banking information could end badly if there's not a clean break. And it can also be used to cover controlling and abusive behaviors. And this can especially be today with technology, where they might say, well, if you're not hiding anything, why don't you share your location with me? It won't be a problem if you weren't going anywhere bad. And so here's the things that people should be able to keep private. Their passwords is a big one, as well as financial information and personal information like social security numbers, as well as past traumatic experiences and past intimate experiences. Those are not things that need to be shared if you're not comfortable sharing with them, as well as potentially embarrassing information that you might not want getting out there. And there's also things that are important to be transparent about in a relationship, and that should be shared with the partner. Things like infidelity and feelings of anger, frustration with the other person. Those are not good, as we learned in the previous myth, to keep to yourself. As well as concerns about the relationship and any mistakes or wrongdoing that might affect their lives. And so what are, if we go to the next slide, what are some ways of creating a safe place for sharing? And this is really important if there's going to be trust in a relationship, and if people are going to share like vulnerable personal information with one another. And this can look like not laughing or making fun of someone when they share something, as well as not overreacting, even if what they're saying might cause you to feel angry or jealous or upset with them. But if there's like a strong overreaction, then that can discourage them from telling things in the future, as well as being trustworthy and letting them know that if they share anything, that you're going to keep it a secret, as within the confines of safety to themselves and other people, of course. But if someone tells you a secret, then they should know that they can trust you with that, as well as don't pressure them to share anything that they don't feel comfortable sharing. That can create a bit of an unsafe space for letting people speak openly about things and sharing when they're ready. So, why might teens struggle with privacy boundaries? So one reason could be insecurity about the relationship. They might not trust their partner, and they might want to, have suspicions and they want to know like who their partner's talking to, and like where they're going, and these other ways that can be really unhealthy to things to keep going in a relationship. As well as they might not have privacy outside of their relationship. They might come from a family where there's, as long as you're living under my roof, you don't have privacy kind of attitude. And they might bring that to the relationship, either in that they don't feel like they don't understand the boundaries, that their partner shouldn't know everything about them, or they feel like they're entitled to know everything about their partner. As well as they might be unaware of the risks about sharing personal information. And I think this is especially true on social media these days. I've just noticed with teenagers, they might give every little detail about their lives right there for the public to put, and just the other risks like sharing social security or bank account information with people too. And so, yeah, that was the myth of oversharing or sharing too much information.
Right. And this to me stands out as a very worrisome one, where, and those of you who have been to other webinars know that I like to put on the adult cap occasionally and be like, I don't understand teen relationships because it's been so long since. But when thinking about this from an adult relationship lens, one big concern there is something that Annie really brings up, I think, in a very good way, is about if you're coming from a relationship where the most important people, or if you're coming from a place where the most important people in your life are your parents, are those who do keep tabs on you, but for legal and financial and just caring reasons. And then this new person is also now incredibly important to you. The basis might feel kind of normal. The basis of having to share all that information, of having to let them know where you are. So from an adult lens, it's really important that we keep an eye, and we make sure that we're acknowledging the difference in the relationships and explaining that as people are moving into a relationship. Yeah, you might be in love. You could be in love. Romeo and Juliet were very young and apparently in love. But being in love isn't the same as the relationship with your parents and your family. If that's something that's, if sharing information is important to your family, it's not the same thing in that relationship, in this new relationship. So explaining the differences in those can be awkward, sitting down with the team being like, I love you, so I watch you. He loves you, so he shouldn't. And there's a lot of complications in that discussion, of course, but I think it is important to at least acknowledge or start acknowledging the difference in relationships. Annie, what's the third myth of dating relationships?
So the third myth of dating relationships is that couples should do everything together. Healthy couples should spend as much time as they can together. And when they aren't together in person, they should be texting or Snapchatting. And if couples don't spend time together, it's because they're too distant, they don't enjoy being around each other, or they don't really care about each other. This is wrong. Partners should have a balanced life outside of their relationship. And while it's important for a couple to spend quality time together, this should not come at the expense of other relationships, activities, or responsibilities. So why can too much time together be unhealthy? Friendships and families can start to suffer if a teenager gets into a new relationship and they spend all of their time together, then they're not spending time with their friends anymore, and those relationships can start to dwindle a bit. And responsibilities can be neglected if oh, don't do homework, why don't you come spend time with me? Might happen. And it can also be used to isolate a partner by intentionally pushing them away and intentionally like keeping them away from their other friendships and their close family relationships. And it can also make it harder to end the relationship if someone has spent all of their time with one person and that person is like their main emotional support system, then leaving that relationship can be really difficult. So what are some healthy boundaries around spending time together? That could look like texting and social media breaks. And this one is especially relevant to teenagers these days, where if you spent time around one lately, you'll notice they're always on their phones, always. And it can be difficult to explain why you didn't text somebody back. If you're always, if they know you've got your phone with them, but just because someone has a phone doesn't mean they're available 24/7 to respond. And so setting clear boundaries around, like, if I don't text you, it doesn't mean I don't care about you. It means I just don't want to text right now, and that's all right. And it's also a good boundary to keep some friendships separate. Just because you're dating someone doesn't mean you need to be friends with all of their friends and they need to be friends with all of your friends. It's good to have some friendships outside of the relationship, as well as respecting others' needs for space. Someone does not need an excuse not to hang out with you. Sometimes people just need to be alone and need to have distance from their partner, and that's perfectly fine. As well as maintaining individual hobbies and interests. Again, the relationship should not come at the expense of a hobby or extracurricular activity that somebody really cares about. That should be an equal priority in their life. And so why might a teen struggle with this? It could be that they have trouble making friends outside of a relationship, and their romantic relationship might be their sole source of support. And so they might only want to spend time with their partner because that's the only person that they have to spend time with. Could also be infatuation and excitement, especially in a new relationship where, people might want to spend all the time together they can because they're so excited to get to know each other. And that, that's probably fine for a few weeks, but after that infatuation starts to fade, it's good to get back to other relationships and other hobbies and interests. And they might want to avoid spending time at home. If their home life is particularly stressful, if they don't feel valued by their parents or their family, or if they're just very isolated at home, then spending time with a partner, especially a very, affectionate, caring partner, could be a lot of the report they receive or support that they receive. And so they might not want to give that time up. And it could also be jealousy, where someone doesn't want their partner hanging out with other people, going to study groups with them, or going to like hang out with friends where the opposite gender is. And so, if you're going somewhere where there's a lot of boys, then I'll have to come with you. And maybe that kind of rhetoric might come up, or especially with location tracking now. It's, you might always know where someone is. Hey, where are you? I'm texting you right now, texting you all the time. But yeah, do you have anything to add on this one, Chris?
I appreciate the opportunity, because I do. Thank you. So yeah, I think that this particular discussion could be an entire presentation. There's so much around this idea of people not being able to not spend time with somebody else, that like this is a core thing that we look for when we're discussing abusive relationships. How often you're able to leave, how are your friendships? Are those still strong? Are you able to hang out with people outside of this? So there's so much here. But the thing that I would like to say is, Annie spoke about like the first couple weeks of a relationship and how that infatuation period might be is normal, and it is. Everyone who's been in a relationship knows that those first couple weeks, that first month is a fantastic feeling, and you just want to be around that person all the time. So as adult allies, that's a really good time to talk with the teens, the youth that value your opinion, and talk about skill building, because that's also a really good time to build the skills necessary in taking a step outside the relationship. Those first 2 weeks, that first month, you want to be around that person all the time, but we know what's healthy is having your own life, having your own hobbies, maintaining other friendships, other support structures around you. So, as your teen is entering a relationship, might be time for a conversation. Hey, spend a ton of time with him, but make sure that you're also practicing your own hobbies. Make sure that you're not letting who you are as a human being go to the wayside, because who you are as a human being is valuable, with or without somebody else. Doesn't matter. You're valuable, and what you bring is valuable. So keep working towards that. But again, we could talk about this for hours, and unfortunately, we still got but we still have 2 more myths to go through. So I'll stop talking now. Annie, what's myth number 4?
Myth number 4 can be a bit of an awkward one to talk about, especially for teenagers, but is that couples should be sexually intimate, and that a relationship isn't serious unless a couple has sex. And if a couple doesn't have sex, it's because they don't love each other, or not committed, or uncool. This is wrong. Sex should only happen when both partners are comfortable and ready. And while physical intimacy is important in many relationships, it's not a requirement, nor is it a measure of how much a couple loves each other. So why can this myth be harmful? It can lead to someone feeling very pressured to have sex if they're not ready to yet, or if they just don't want to. And this can lead them to do something that they might have feelings of shame or regret about if they don't feel ready to do that. And it can also lead to unwanted pregnancy or STDs if they don't have access to birth control or protection, and they feel like very pressured to engage in sexual activities anyways, and that can lead to that, as well as conflicting cultural expectations, where somebody might have a home life where it's very important to abstain from that, but then a school life where it's the expectation not to abstain from that, and that they should be doing that. And there can also be shame, where if, especially for young men, if they might feel ashamed if they're not able, or if they don't reach that milestone in their relationship, because there's a lot of pressure and very negative pressure on young boys and men, or men and young men, to have sex, and like a lot of self-worth is, and like masculinity is rested on that. So why might a couple want to hold off on having sex? There's of course concern about STDs or pregnancy, not feeling ready, and respect for family rules, and some as well as waiting for marriage, which are all valid reasons not to want to engage in sex. And so what are some reasons that a teenager might struggle with this? So they could be pressured from their partner, and certainly pressured from their peers. And then there's also gender expectations, which are very different. And especially in heterosexual couples, where the girl feel like young girls or teenage girls are often pressured not to have sex. And there's kind of this balance they have to find between, like, if they're too sexually promiscuous, it can be a bad thing. But if they're not at all sexually or like if they don't engage in anything, then that's also a bad thing. They're too uptight. And so they have to kind of balance that. And those factors might play into it rather than the factors of do they want to engage in it or not, and which should be what drives them, what motivates them in this. And as well as I said before, with teenage boys, where they have a lot of pressure to engage in that, even if they don't want to. And media and culture norms is a big one too, where in almost any teenage or high school setting TV show, everyone's having sex all of the time. And that just seems to be the norm in that. And it's easy for teenagers who consume a lot of that media to think that that's the norm and that's what everybody's doing. And yeah, did you want to add anything on this one, Chris?
Well, my thoughts on this is I agree. This is a really, really awkward conversation to have. Just in general, it's very important, and I agree with every point you put. But I'd love to know if anyone else had any thoughts on this particular subject. If so, hold on, sorry, let me back up, pretend we didn't see that slide. If so, toss them in the chat. Like, have you had to have conversations with a teen about these pressures that they feel? Are those pressures the same that you felt when you were a teen, or has I don't know, has time changed what those pressures look like? We have a lot of allies on this webinar right now, so I'd love to get their opinions, but I'm sure we also have parents and older siblings and people who have also had thoughts around this particular issue. Sex and teens is a hard thing to talk about sometimes, so it's good to have a wide range of places. So maybe share in the chat if you're willing, any conversations you've had, any observations you've had while we start talking about the last one. Annie, maybe the fifth myth. What is it? Nobody has any idea because I didn't accidentally press a button that showed it.
All right. The fifth myth is very important in our line of work. It's that couples should stay with each other unconditionally. People should stay together no matter what happens between them or how they change, and that true love means staying with someone even if they cause the partner distress or harm. And this is wrong. If someone is being harmed or is no longer happy in a relationship, they have no obligation to stay. While forgiveness and acceptance are important in romantic relationships, there are some actions that are never acceptable and boundaries that should never be crossed. So why can this myth be harmful? It might pressure people to stay in an unhappy relationship because they don't want to be perceived as failing in that relationship and having, not tried hard enough or done something wrong. And it can also lead people to ignore red flags, or if there's a warning sign and, they're worried or concerned about behaviors in their partners or hurt by some of the things their partner says and does, they might ignore that and say, oh, well, I love this person unconditionally despite these things, and as well as forgiving too easily if something went too far and something that should cause anger and should, be like a rupture in trust, saying, no, well, I love them unconditionally, so I'll let this one go, as well as not upholding strong boundaries, because staying with somebody unconditionally means that it can mean that there are no conditions, and that there are no boundaries that are too far, and that can be really dangerous. And so why might somebody want to end a relationship? And this, I think breaking up has a lot of times some really negative connotations, but especially for teenagers who are changing and growing on like a weekly basis, into new people and trying out new identities and new interests, it might just be that the person they started dating 2 months ago is completely different person today, and or maybe wants to go in a different direction, wants to go to a different college or something. Then that's a really good reason to split up. It could also be that infidelity happened, and that it's just something that partner's not really willing to forgive on that. And it could also just be dissatisfaction. If one or both partners just aren't happy in the relationship, they're not satisfied, then that's a perfectly valid reason to end the relationship. And of course, it could be that if a partner has caused harm to somebody, then that can also be a good reason to end a relationship. So why might a teen struggle with this? There could be guilt in ending the relationship, and not wanting to hurt the other person, not wanting to cause them pain or cause a disruption. And it could be that somebody doesn't know their own boundaries, and that even if their partner is doing something that they don't like, they don't know that they can stand up for themselves, and they don't know that behavior is inappropriate. That also goes to if they consider abusive behavior as normal. If their parents are like, if there's an abusive dynamic or a very toxic dynamic with their parents, then they might consider that this behavior that they're seeing in their relationship is just what a relationship looks like. And it could also be that someone is afraid to leave the relationship, and that can be really scary. And that is something that is very important to talk to teenagers about, and very important to give them resources about. DVS is a really great resource. And so if you know a teenager who is afraid to leave their relationship or is being harmed in their relationship, please give them our number. Our number is 425-25-ABUSE. It's also right on this slide. And as well as maybe talk with them about like safety planning, or we can help, DVS can help with that as well. But it's really important to notice these things and look for warning signs if you're working with teenagers and you're hearing some things that are very concerning that are happening in their relationship. It's great. It's really important to talk to them about that and talk to them about their boundaries and how they can get help.
Absolutely. Well, that was very informative. And a lot of what you covered today crosses, and I'm sure everyone's had this thought, a lot of what Annie covered today crosses from just teen relationships to adult relationships. Not in exactly the same ways. Thank God. I don't know about y'all, but I'm very happy I don't have those hormones of a teenage boy anymore. They were the worst things on earth. But a lot of the same stuff that we look for when working with survivors of domestic violence at an older age are the same red flags that you can see in these situations. A teen who's not allowed to spend time with their friends because of a jealousy issue is a red flag. So that's a conversation to be had and potentially a referral to us. So Annie, thank you so much. How was it? How'd you feel about it?
Well, as it was my first presentation, I was a little bit nervous, but I think we covered some really important topics today. And I really hope that everyone here learns something that they can bring into their work lives, their personal lives, and any other time it might come in handy to know this information.
Absolutely. I think they did. I know I did. And I like the style. And as I said at the beginning, this is the first of many. We hope to keep this going weekly or bi-weekly. And we're going to have another one on the 14th. The 14th, I will be talking about the cycles of violence, both in an individual relationship and generationally. So we're excited to be presenting that on the 14th. I'll be sending out a webinar registration, and I believe that everyone who's here today has access to that. But if you know somebody who might be interested, don't hesitate to forward it on. And thank you everyone so much for being here today. Do not hesitate to reach out if you have any ideas, anything that we can do to help you in your work, to help the teens in your life, to help you. We are here for that, and we just want to constantly be doing that work. So thank you everyone for showing up, and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Annie, great job. You nailed it.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.